welcome to World Inside, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, 2 sessions at the presser today, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi reiterated China's positions on tricky international issues, including the South China Sea, DPRK, and more. And women leaders on International Women's Day will explore the difficulties and advantages for women in leadership roles around the world. Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a press conference on the sidelines of the 2 sessions on Tuesday as the country's lawmakers examined the 13th Five-Year Plan. China's foreign policy on international and regional issues is in the spotlight once again.
Worthwhile and fruitful. This is what Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Tuesday about China's many diplomatic efforts in recent years. Wang's remarks during the press conference covered a range of subjects, including China's relations with world powers, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Hangzhou G20 summit, and of course the hot-button issues of the South China Sea and the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
I want to remind you, the freedom of navigation does not equal the freedom to run amok. If someone wants to riot the South China Sea and destabilize Asia, China will not agree.
Wang reiterated that the Nansha Islands are Chinese territories. He also said that besides meeting basic defense needs, China is building more facilities for civilian use with the purposes of offering public services to the international community. Wang said that journalists from home and abroad will be invited to visit the islets once the construction of the facility is completed. Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula was another focal point.
Resolution 2270 does not just contain sanctions, it also reiterates support for the 6-party talks and asks all the parties to refrain from taking any actions that might aggravate tensions. So in China's view, Resolution 2270 must be implemented in its entirety.
Wang stressed that China and the DPRK still enjoy normal state-to-state relations and that China cherishes its traditional bond with the country. He also pledged that China will support and help the DPRK if the latter seeks development and security, but China will not accommodate its pursuit of nuclear and missile programs. China has become more active in its external relations as its international status has risen. Last year saw major developments for China's involvement in international institutions. The country now has the 3rd largest quota and voting power in the International Monetary Fund. Its currency renminbi has been included in the SDR basket. China has become a member of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and China made the 2nd biggest contribution to the United Nations. Wang Yi's comments made it clear that China aims to play a bigger role in the existing international order.
And for more on China's diplomacy and foreign policy, we're joined here in the Beijing studio by Mr. Yang Xiyu, who is a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Also, we are joined here by Mr. Yuan Peng, Vice President of China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Meanwhile, joining us from Beijing GenY studio, we have Mr. Rick Dunham, a veteran American journalist who's now the co-director of Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University. Welcome to you as well, Rick. Today, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave his annual press conference. This is an opportunity many in journalism have been looking forward to get an in-depth look at what China and how China is looking at some of the most important issues. One, jump immediately, DPRK, denuclearization on Korean Peninsula. Minister Wang mentioned one thing the very first time. 3-party talks, 4-party talks, 5-party talks, and of course the original 6-party talks all could be possible. Wow, this is the breaking news. Mr. Yuan, given your knowledge about the issue, what would this really mean?
This showed how realistic in Chinese DPRK policy after the 4th try of nuclear test of a DPRK. Today, the most urgent thing is to denuclearization and the stability of the region. The only means, any ways to achieve this goal is acceptable by China. So this time, I think not only stick to the original 6-party talks, but also echoed like our co-president, Madam Park's five-party talks, and also other three, four party talks are also welcome. Showed Chinese both constructive and flexible and also realistic.
When China is getting flexible and constructive, very pragmatic, Mr. Yang, will others get the message though?
Well, at least such flexible proposals and arrangements make every party to be easier for taking part in the talks and the negotiations. In practice, actually, quite several years ago, when six-party talks was underway, under the six-party framework, there had been a bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, no five-party. But any flexible format were welcome and useful. So that's one point of the news. But I think the bigger news is the term of regime, the permanent peace regime, that is the 919 joint statement, the term.
Right.
That means the negotiation for the peace regime. So the peace regime means such a regime could be reached or built up by several formats of negotiations, bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, and even five-party talks. So I think Foreign Minister Wang Yis' remarks or ideas really offer a broader framework, more flexible framework for every possible talks among every possible party.
Well, Minister Wang is offering so many possibilities. Will it work though? Let's take a look at some of the current development and deadlock over denuclearization. Last week, the U.S. and South Korea's joint military drills kicked off. Earlier, the DPRK's leader Kim Jong-un threatened to preemptively conduct nuclear attacks at the U.S. and South Korea in response to the drill. Meanwhile, South Korea also issued more unilateral sanctions against the DPRK following the UN Security Council resolution. Tensions over the DPRK nuclear issue and tests are escalating, and the six-party talks have also come to a deadlock, as we mentioned earlier. Therefore, Mr. Yuan, will others get the message? Are they willing to get the message?
Of course, Chinese foreign minister and Chinese people hopes the other countries can echo the Chinese constructive initiative. Before this, we have noticed that Foreign Minister Wang also proposed the so-called parallel negotiations, which means denuclearization negotiation plus the replacement of armistice agreement with peace treaty. I think because DPRK thinks the precondition for denuclearization is a peace treaty, and the states thinks the precondition for peace treaty is denuclearization. So Chinese ways are okay, stop. Let's find a third way that make those two agreements or two negotiations simultaneously. So we call them parallel. And this is not enough for the relevant party to accept. So today, I think Minister Wang added another initiative that any negotiations, not only six-party talks, and 3, 4, even 5-party talks, all can be one possibility for managing the potential crisis of.
Well, you two help us to understand much better what exactly is behind Mr. Wang's words. But let me go to you, Mr. Dunham. As a veteran journalist, I'm sure probably you have already noticed in the media coverage, not many international media organizations have really picked up this very crucial message coming from Beijing, from China's foreign minister, about the future negotiation possibilities. And therefore, may I ask you the question, Mr. Dunham, have parties involved refused to look at what could be the real solution? Have they been only sticking to their own points, not necessarily willing to listen, not necessarily willing to work on anything that is in any way different from their any official plan?
Well, I think you've identified the key news today, which was the flexibility, which was two-party, three-party, four-party, five-party, six-party talks. And I actually am surprised that there has not been more international media coverage of that. A lot of the other things that the foreign minister said were repeating things that were policy. This was actually breaking news. I think that there is a problem in that North Korea has been unwilling to negotiate a peace treaty with the condition that the United States put on it, which was to put on the table the nuclear ambitions of North Korea. Not to say that there had to be the denuclearization, which is the Chinese government position, but even to talk about it. There were secret negotiations going on between the United States and North Korea, but they ended when North Korea had its nuclear test earlier in the year.
Very interesting. We need to correct that the minister was talking about 3-party, 4-party, 5-party, and 6-party, not necessarily mentioned in any way 2 parties. Yes. We'll see how things would evolve, but interestingly, having said that though, let me just follow up a little bit more on that. Mr. Yuan, Minister Wang also said, seemed to be a balanced answer. One hand, traditional friendship with DPRK. Okay, if you need something, financial support, social support, China is going to be there to support you. On the other hand, as a permanent member of the Security Council, China is going to unswervingly, that's the word he used, implement the resolution, which also, of course we know, include sanctions. Can that balance be kept? I mean, at least from the other side, how that will be perceived by Pyongyang, for example. And is this balance necessarily going to be appreciated by the party?
We have to have the balanced approach to deal with this very complicated situation. As the 18th Parties Congress report mentioned, in dealing with international affairs, China should deal with it on its own merit, which means based on the fact, not on the ideological or social system like before. So this time, if a DPRK made some mistakes, China bound to show our responsibility, our obligation to punish it, no matter our relations, how close we are. But on the other hand, the punishment per se is not to make it just like the states want it to collapse or a regime change, but should be take care of the consideration of the livelihood of the average people. So how to balance the punishments and the traditional relations? I think this showed how difficult China and how sensibility of China today to think about our DPRK approach ahead.
Mr. Yang, in the American diplomacy, there is always what they call a combination of carrots and also sticks. But of course, China does not necessarily subscribe to that. And yet some say this resolution put out by the UN Security Council is a product of that. Do you believe so? When China is part of that resolution, how do you think China is swaying from its original position, or actually it is still sticking to its original thoughts?
Well, China doesn't follow the way of thinking by American type, like carrots and stick. So I don't think the resolution is a type of the products for carrots and stick, simply because this balanced resolution contains 2 kinds of things. One kind of things can be translated into the so-called stakes, like sanction measures. However, the other part that is more important than the sanction measure is diplomacy to negotiations with the resumption of security talks, especially based on the 9/90 joint statement. That part is not a carrot. However, it's a sort of exit strategy. Now, every party fall in the deadlock. You can imagine how difficult situation North Korea will face after the resolution. However, we are in a, if not more, but also the same difficult situation either, because only by sanctions we cannot solve what we concerned.
Right.
So we need really exit. So such a balanced resolution is designed to provide an exit strategy for every party, so that everyone can gain the so-called win-win result.
Right. The question is not just about the DPRK issue or Korean Peninsula nuclear issue. It's also about how through this issue we would be able to understand better the central spirit of China's current diplomacy, as China's role is getting ever bigger in the region and all of the world. Mr. Dantam, I know you were sitting there going through the whole press conference with your Chinese colleagues. What do you make of that specific message? In any way, do you think Chinese Foreign Minister Wang's remarks and the breaking news about from 3 to 4 to even 5 and 6 party talks reflect China now's spirit when it comes to regional stability and global diplomacy?
Right. Well, he talked about more than just the Korean Peninsula, more than just East Asia. He talked about important things like Iran and Saudi Arabia, that China could play a very constructive role in intractable problems in the Middle East. And you look at South Asia with India and Pakistan. You look at what China has done, both in terms of additional peacekeeping and in terms of the diplomatic outreach to Europe, to Africa, to Latin America.
But on that point, I have to let the two of you to shed some light. Mr. Yuan, China is such a big player these days. If you don't do anything, people would say you are not shouldering global responsibilities. If you are doing something, people would say probably you have an agenda and an ego hidden behind it. Minister Wang today talked about many of the initiatives from China for the world. Is that going to be convincing?
The whole presentation on this press conference by Foreign Minister Wang showed that is a new style of Chinese diplomacy. That is big country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics.
Very abstract to help us to understand.
Yeah, this is a very brand new, which shows that today China admits ourselves is a big country. So our diplomacy should fit the new status of China as a big country. As a big country, first of all, you need to think some big things. And secondly, you should hold more responsibility, more obligation than average countries. And thirdly, we should not only think about ourselves, our own national interest, or regional interest, but also think about some global issues. For example, 10 years ago, nobody knows in China about Sudan, Darfur, and so many people concerned or care about the security of Syria, Iran. But today you see any agreements on Middle East, on Africa, on peace treaty, Israel and Palestine, all relevant to China, and China all play a very proactive role in all those issues, which shows that China now play a very bigger role as a big country diplomacy.
Playing more role means you probably also get more chances to be scrutinized by the others. Mr. Yang, U.S. has been this world power, and of course it's very different when it comes to their diplomatic style with China. But China rises and wants to be a responsible player. How prepared do you think, by listening to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yis' press conference, ready for being scrutinized, ready for come out and make things clear to the others? If not clear one time, maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times. Mr. Yang, is China going to be persistent in that regard?
Well, before I answer your question, I need to categorize Wang Yis' remarks by saying China is not the United States. China will not become the United States. That's quite a diplomatic wording. Let me translate plainly.
He was talking about China is not doing the Monroe Doctrine, not the expansionism, not hegemony.
No. Not only that, but
Not
also,
only that.
but also no intention to replace U.S. to be the leader. So what Wang Yi tried to say is, plainly say, China hate to lead any other countries else, and also hate to be led. So that is the new type of the power, unlike the United States. When they were weaker, they hate to be led. But when they get strong, they try every effort to lead every country in the world. So that is the nature of Chinese new diplomacy. When U.S. understand fully China neither to be led nor to lead, then I think that would be easier for deal with China-U.S. complicated relationship. And also the contribution more to the international community. I think China contribute to more based on the win-win results.
That's what I'm about to ask, following what your thought. If China and the U.S. so different in its diplomatic styles, can the two really work together? Minister Wang today mentioned about climate change, about the internet security. Of course, these are areas we're all familiar with. But the thing is, it really needs China and U.S. work together on any issue in order to be resolved. But is that possible if the diplomatic style is so different, if the diplomatic ideologies are so different, Mr. Yuan?
We can cooperate. The history have showed that we cooperate very well. But today, the media focus too much on the negative side of the relations. Actually, if you follow the U.S.-China relations comprehensively, you'll find that we have a very good cooperation in climate change, in Syria, in Iran, and regional in Afghanistan, and economic cooperation and the people-to-people. Yes, we face some difficulties in the South China Sea, in cybersecurity, and even in East China Sea. But the mule-to-mule relations today still have a very mature attitude today than 10 years or 5 years before. So the problem is that how to face the more complicated situation of the U.S.-China relations and deal with it in a more complicated or complex thinking rather than the white and black.
I know both of you gentlemen have been working on many conferences and workshops with your American counterpart to exactly solve the problems that you have just mentioned. I hope you guys have great luck. Before we go, let me go back to you, Mr. Dunham. I was there at the press conference given by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yis. This is the time when I noticed the least political jargons ever in the history of press conference given by the Foreign Ministry so far. That's a really interesting message to me, at least to a certain extent. I don't know you as a veteran journalist.
Right. Well, I think it was his message was strong, consistent, but it also was addressed to the outside world. It wasn't just addressed in the language of politics, in the language of diplomacy. And I think he is uniquely able. I've watched him speak several times in Washington at think tanks, and he's able to cut through on difficult issues and explain them in ways that people who are not necessarily experts on the issue can do. I mean, I think that's a particular talent both he and Secretary Kerry on the American side have.
Right. Even though we're talking about individuals, but they are the representative of the new generation of Chinese diplomats. And for now, we want to express our appreciation for the three of you for helping us to understand what exactly is going on in China's mind when it comes to diplomacy and foreign policy. Yuan Peng, Yang Shiyu, really appreciate it. And Rick Dunham, thank you so much. Thank you, gentlemen. Stay with us here on World Insight. We've got our final segment coming right up. International Women's Day. Joining us for a discussion of the difficulties and advantages for women leaders around the world. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News, coming to you live from Beijing. Today is International Women's Day. In the past decades, more and more women have entered into political and business leadership positions like these two. However, the number of women leaders still lags behind men, and the path to leadership is often different for women. Before we dive into a discussion about female leadership, let's have a look at the current situation.
The rise of female leadership. There are currently 10 women serving as heads of state and 14 others in top-ranking government positions. In these roles, they deal with major regional and global issues. This is a low proportion of all state leaders, but does signal progress. In the business world, progress can also be seen. In 2015, around a quarter of startup founders were female in several big cities. However, the path to the top is not easy for women. Listed companies have an average of 0.93 female directors, compared to 7.74 male directors. Some female leaders have called for more solidarity among women in business.
It's important to be not a sole voice out there shouting to the high heavens, but have a group that's credible, a group that's progressive, and also inclusive.
Even in competition for the top position of the UN, we can see more and more female candidates. Among 7 candidates announced to run for the new Secretary General, 3 are female, and many expect a woman will lead the UN for the first time in 70 years. Whether our next UN Secretary General will be a woman is uncertain, but it's clear that the path to leadership for women is both difficult and extremely rewarding.
For more on female leadership around the world, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by 2 lady guests. First of all, Ms. Julia Broussard, who is the China Country Program Manager for UN Women. Welcome, Julia. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And also in the studio, we have Ms. Xiong Jing, who is the Executive Director of Media Monitor for Women Networks. She and her colleagues have been working on some new media platform for women's messages. Welcome as well. Happy International Women's Day, I should say, to the 2 of you.
Happy International Women's Day.
Thank you so much. What about women's leadership? Well, this could be a political term, this could be an economic term, and social term. What about the current situation from your perspective? Is the board member issue going to be the focal point?
No, I think women's leadership in any sphere and any type of organization should be the focal point, not just boards.
Well, it's easier said than done. Don't we need to have a breaking ground?
We do. We need something that sets a precedent in every country. Yes.
What do you think, Ms. Xiong?
Yeah, I think we need more women in all levels of like companies and also government organizations. Yeah.
That sounds politically correct, isn't it? The question is how. The question is how. We've seen, let's just say people in Europe particularly, started with the board member issue, that there has to be a percentage of board members of multinational companies that have to be women. Otherwise, these multinational companies are not likely to be respected. Is that going to be the way? That's their way. Is that way going to work in China?
Yeah, I think it will also work in China, because if we have more like women board members, we may have the company will run better. There are research that could support this.
What kind of research are we talking about?
Maybe Julia can tell me more
There's
about
all
it.
kinds of research. There's several studies that show that when more women are in the leadership of companies, private sector companies, board and C-level positions, the company performs better. It's more profitable than the same type of company in its sector that doesn't have as many women.
But then on the other hand, people would argue China has already long has this tradition of, even a quote from Chairman Mao, women holding half of the sky. And women's quote-unquote equality at workplace is not a problem at all. Look at the private sector. We've got a lot of women who are the heads of the business. Probably there are also a few sitting in the boards, if they have a board. So is China's situation different? Should we have a very different focus?
Well, China's doing pretty good when you look at the statistics compared to some other countries, but why is it not 50%? Why isn't it 50% of leaders in all organizations are women here? That's not what it is.
Well, is that too much expectation though?
No, I don't think it is. I think that's what every country and every company should be aiming for.
Well, yes, aiming for, but I know you're coming from the UN Women. This is an organization totally advocating for women's rights and equalities with men. But the thing is, we have to start from something pragmatic, systematically pushing it forward. So aiming it too high, is it really going to help us? Having an agenda is good, but will it really help us? We have a goal that's unlikely to be realized in the near term.
If you don't aim high enough, you also don't get to the goal. So would an Olympic athlete aim for number 3, or would he aim for number 1, right?
Wishful thinking or actually practical road ahead?
I was going to suggest one way, the European way, is to have a mandated quota of women on boards. There's another alternative from Australia, and that is that it's not mandated that companies have a certain percentage of women on the board, but they have to explain it in their annual report. If they have no women, they have to have a statement in their annual report saying why no women on their boards. And just that one soft change made many companies add women to their boards.
We've already seen Julie coming from originally United States, but now working for UN, very active and enthusiastic about this. What about Ms. Xiong? You're originally coming from China. You have been arguing for the same sake, but what about the implementation? Is it possible? We all understand the theories. So what about the real situation, the realities when it comes to implementation?
I think the problem lies in also about the culture. It's also about culture, because like men and women, they don't actually trust a women boss. When a woman becomes a boss, they will say it's like a bossy. They say you are bossy, or like they don't have the they think they don't have the enough ability to lead a company or lead any organization.
But aren't we talk about two things? I mean, on the one hand, we talk about women eventually reaching the goal and reaching the position of being a leader. You're talking about once women are in the leadership, they seem to get what you consider as more scrutiny than the others. It seems that we're talking about two different stages of development. But before we move on to that, let's take a look at some of the ranking of countries or percentages of women in senior business roles. This is a real number. New research from Grant Thornton reveals that Eastern European countries dominate the international legal table for senior female business leaders. Russia has once again topped the ranking with 45% of senior management positions held by women, followed by the Philippines and Lithuania. And China ranks the 9th with 30%. US sees 23%, while the UK is 21%. Japan, on the other hand, only 7% of senior leadership roles are held by women, remained at the bottom of the list. We don't want to single any countries out, but we want to have a general situation to be introduced to our audience over there. So it seems China's position is not that bad. Yis-Xiong?
Yeah, it's very interesting that compared to some developing countries, there's like
even developed countries, the U.S. is only 21%, China already 30%.
Yeah, compared to developed countries, some developing countries like China and some like BRIC countries, they actually have higher percentage of women's leadership. I think maybe one reason is that like we are in a very fast developing country, so in this area, women are more that they have the opportunity to get like to break the rules and take the challenge.
I feel like Ms. Xiong is already bringing us to another philosophical talk. So before you do that, let me ask you about some of the specific interesting case that you and your colleagues been working on. For example, when we talk about professional women, you guys were putting a poster, shall we say, or an ad in Beijing's subway station before the Lunar New Year. Because during the Lunar New Year, all the young women going back home, their migrant workers going back home, and their parents would ask, so have you found a man? And therefore they feel embarrassed. The whole holiday season seems to be scrutinized by the whole family member. So you guys put out a advertisement suggesting differently. Tell us about what exactly it is and help us to understand what are the realities that young women in China are facing these days.
Yeah, I think marriage pressure is really a problem. Like many young women and also men, they are facing this problem. Because we have the culture that a lot of parents and the families, they expect you to, like, not only that you graduate from a good university where you can have a good job, but you also will have to have a nice family. If you don't have a family, that your life is not
completed, as they say. Yes, we indeed. So what did you guys do?
So we placed an advertisement in Dongzhimen station. So this we want to call for like.
What's the advertisement like?
We have a little doll and like a girl, and they had like a big heart in front of her, and they say that dear parents, that I'm single but I'm good. Like a single can also be happy, and yeah, something like this. And I also have a hotline. We have a hotline saying that if you have this
for
kind
happy
of,
single ladies,
and also men.
very interesting. That make a stir in the Chinese society because that was really the cultural tradition, going back home, being scrutinized by everybody. Julie, you see, the Chinese young women are doing something very courageous and funny in a way to play with some of the stereotypes. Is that going to be the way out from social change to real economic rights change, as we mentioned in the boardroom and many others? How far is it?
Social change and economic change are interrelated, so I love this example. I'm so happy.
Did you pose? Did you pose in front of that?
No, I
poster?
wish I could have. I found out about it a little bit too late. But it's a great example of using humor to catch the attention of the people to make a social point. And we need to see more of that happening.
Did many women coming back from their hometown suggesting to you they were having better time than they used to be?
They suggest us to put the advertisement in their hometown. We
I
need
see.
more.
Wow, it's very interesting. Having said that, though, we really need to help our audience to get what exactly is the reality, and also what could be the most efficient way getting to the goals that both of you, coming from different cultures, but knowing Chinese situation very well, most efficient way to get there, Julie?
Work with young people. Change the attitudes of young people. The young people today, their attitudes can change a little more easily than the older generations, and they're the leaders of the future. They're going to make the difference. They're the mothers and fathers of the future. They're the heads of corporations of the future.
Right.
They're the scientists of the future. They're the government leaders of
You
the
seem
future.
to push the responsibilities away and say, well, it's all on your young kids.
No, it's not all on them. The older generations need to guide them. Organizations like your NGO, like UN, need to come in and help as well.
Okay, and what about from your perspective, Jane? Advocacy is going to work, but it's not necessarily going to have one poster in the subway change the whole attitude.
Yeah.
It's going to be back and forth. You probably have to be prepared for that. And also, you cannot sometimes have humor about everything, every challenge you have. So the reality is like that. What can you do? You and your colleagues, for example, about economic rights, more equality, more gender parity, what can you really do pragmatically?
Because every time we do our advocacy activities, people will tell us that, oh, you need more, and also you need to do something practical. But actually, for us, we are young people. We don't have a lot of resources. We put this into we make it into a news, or we want more public discussion about this kind of topic. We think that if more people are talking about it, then there's hope that we could change it.
Attention means
attention.
possible opportunities for change.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, some would also suggest there probably could be some wishful thinking, because when you have in the society more freedom, it does not necessarily going to guarantee you to make what you later could be considering as the most appropriate choice. On that point, Jing, may you say your generation are having much more options,
Yeah.
but people have difficulties to choose. And also, because of not fighting through to get what you have already today, would in a way help you to ignore some of the most cherished rights as other generations of women see. They have been fighting very hard for. What do you make of that kinds of statements or people's perceptions about you?
We are fighting hard too, because maybe compared to our older generation, we have more freedom. But I think for me, and also for many young girls who graduated from universities, who have education, who had the opportunity to have education, they want more. When they come to the society, when they want to find a job, they will find that it's very difficult for women to find a job. They will face very severe discrimination or obstacles if they want to achieve their dreams. So I think we have a lot, but we still want more, because that's what we deserve.
Well, this is a challenging job market, to say the least. I mean, not just for women, but for everybody in this economy, when the global economy is not necessarily doing that well. Having said that, though, how to make sure women, especially young women, not necessarily going to be to have the setback because of difficulties, but rather to be courageous enough to overcome the setbacks. Not complaining women, but hard-working women, Julie.
They need support networks. They need support networks of other women. They need mentors, both men and women, and they need support from society. And sometimes that comes from the laws, and sometimes that comes from just social networks of society that help them along.
Right. It's going to be a big question mark. China has been making a lot of progress, but certainly if you are a woman anywhere in the world, you are not going to be satisfied because you need to work hard for better. Thank you so much, Julia Broussard and Xiong Jing. Really appreciate it. Once again, happy International Women's Day.
Yes.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Inside CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.